Tennessee's Achilles heel is what, John?
Right now, I'd say depth in the offensive line, and that's not a really bad Achilles heel. When you're talking about depth, and I would have said that. I wouldn't have hesitated. I would have said secondary preseason. I don't think that anymore.
So, John, I'll get to the depth of the offensive line. I know you say you don't think that with the secondary, and I partially agree with Jamal McCoy, who's an amazing corner, but how much is it that the secondary has improved, or the front seven is just so good, life's a lot easier for the secondary now?
Oh, yeah, that's a big factor in it, Caleb. I think when I look at it now and evaluate it, I look at the whole defensive unit. I don't just say it doesn't matter why the secondary is better, I guess is how I look at it. It is better. So this secondary with that defensive front, I'm okay with that. And those linebackers, I'm okay with all that. I just think that defensive front is overwhelming teams and will continue to do so. So, yeah, that's my reasoning on it. And also you could say, well, Tennessee hasn't faced a great quarterback if you want to judge the secondary. But those quarterbacks, on the other hand, still have to go up against that defensive front.
John, I'm going to play the other side of this. And I agree with you. The offensive line depth is the biggest concern. But other than Jermod McCoy, I don't really – I can look at him with my eyeballs and tell you that he's an NFL player. I don't have to look at Pro Football Focus's grades or all that. I can tell you that he's the best defensive back Tennessee's had since Alontae Taylor, and perhaps better. We'll see. But I don't feel confident in them yet because of the quarterbacks they played that have been knocked around. I think a team, maybe Georgia, keeps two tight ends in, which they're apt to use a lot of tight ends over their recent history, and protect Stetson Bennett. And then the DBs could look very susceptible. I may be wrong, but you seem more certain about the DBs than me, and I'm curious why.
Again, I think it's playing better than I thought it would, given the circumstances. The circumstances are it has a great defensive front protecting it. So you go back, Will Brooks, the walk-on. I mean, he made a game-turning play against NC State. I mean, and that basically started the stampede with his interception return for touchdown. I think he's third or fourth leading tackler on the defense now. I didn't think he would be that good. So it's better overall. And you bring up Georgia. That's an interesting point. Georgia does not have the receivers. It's got Carson Beck at quarterback, but I don't know that it has the receivers to exploit Tennessee's secondary like some teams in the past have. And that's why I kind of think, in a way, Alabama just matching up, home field advantage aside, Alabama might be more of a threat to Tennessee secondary because it's got the receivers. Ryan Williams, an instant star as a freshman. So, yeah. But we've been through this for several years now with the defense, with the secondary, and you just can't, you talk about how good McCoy's played. Well, Tennessee didn't have anybody playing that well in the secondary before. So if everybody else were the same, it's not, but if everybody else were the same, it would still be better just by having McCoy at a corner. So I think that's another way to look at it.
Yeah, John, I agree with you. I want to go to the offensive line, back to it for a second, because we all agree offensive line depth's a concern. We saw how bad the tackles were on Saturday without Lance Hurd and John Campbell. Is it fair to say, though, that they won't look that bad all year if they have to go to their backups? Because as bad as Oklahoma is offensively, we can safely say they have maybe one of the best. They're top five, and they have one of the top five pass rushers in college football, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was one of the problems I had with the fan reaction to that game. Yeah, Oklahoma has offensive troubles mainly because of injuries. That's a big factor in it. But they've got some big time players on that defense, all over the defense, in the secondary, at linebacker, in the defensive front. So yeah, they were challenged. There will be other. I'm looking down the schedule. Certainly Alabama and Georgia, but other than those teams, who would be as good defensively as Oklahoma, and who would put as much pressure on backup offensive linemen as Oklahoma? I don't think anybody would.
Yeah, I totally
Yeah, I
agree.
tend to agree with that. John, I find it interesting that you mentioned Keenan Pili, and let's talk for a second about that back seven, because I believe that Tennessee may have, and we're talking specifically about the secondary. We don't know if they've been really tested yet. However, the linebackers have. And I love Keenan Pili. I love Arian Carter. I know they just have two of them because they run this, star position, whatever they call it. But I'm not sure that Tennessee doesn't have two of the best linebackers in the SEC. Am I wrong?
I wouldn't say that right off the top of my head. I mean, I know Georgia is always stacked at linebacker. But I mean, based on what we've seen, it certainly answers the questions that I had in preseason. It's hard for me to say. I mean, Ole Miss has some good linebackers. I haven't sat and watched an entire game for Ole Miss, so it's kind of hard for me to say that. Oklahoma certainly has good linebackers, so it's hard for me to say that. But yeah, it's not like it's one of the worst. It's like at the very least, it middle of the pack at linebackers. And you're right, it may be one of the best.
Yeah, and Caleb, with an edge rusher like James Pierce, I mean, in some ways we would have considered him a linebacker years ago or a defensive end. I don't know how you factor that in, but Tennessee's second level is, I think, elite.
Yeah, I agree. Well, their second level is elite at linebacker and then at cornerback specifically.
I consider cornerback third level. I consider that the secondary.
Oh! I thought you meant like they're okay, yeah, yes. Their second level alone is elite. I mean, by the way, we didn't see much of Jeremiah Thielander over the weekend from my memory, but I mean, he's still a reliable third linebacker. And funny, my brother was talking to me over the weekend. He lives in Memphis, and Elijah Herring, who transferred out, he said Memphis is having the same issue with Elijah Herring that Tennessee had, which is just the lateral quickness, can't move sideline to sideline, and the upgrade is so very clear now at that position with Keenan Pili back.
John, how important is it to open your hips as a linebacker? Because Elijah Herring can't do it. He can't flip his hips. You used to make fun of me for hips, but they've got Keenan Pili, who you mentioned is way faster, and I noticed that in the first game, sideline to sideline. Arian Carter, I've been told, is a student of the game. I think he has all the athletic ability. I've talked to guys around the program that are very, very high on him. I think they've got two playmakers, and Pili may be the most surprising player in his ability. I kind of had him visualized as a Mike Singletary type, just playing in between the tackles.
Jeez. Yeah, if you could be Mike Singletary between the tackles, you wouldn't have to go outside the tackles.
I meant that kind of player. So Mike Singletary, who played for the Bears, for the young ones out there, was the guy who just played the run in between the tackles. Ray Lewis, however, was a middle linebacker that had lateral quickness. So I'm not comparing him to either one of those, but the style he plays, to me, is more Ray Lewis-like than Mike Singletary.
Well, the main thing I like about Pili is his toughness. And if you watch, I was watching BYU Saturday. It reminds me, BYU, whether it's really good, not that good, mediocre, whatever, its teams are usually physical. there's a tendency because it played in the Mountain West for so long. You think of those teams as just high-scoring, offensive-minded teams. But BYU has always been a tough-minded, physical team. Sometimes hit you a little late. But Keenan Peely certainly reminds me of a BYU linebacker, and I mean that as a compliment. And Dave, why don't you call up one of your high school coaching buddies and have that discussion about hips? Okay.
Yeah, hips. I've talked
Great.
I've talked to college coaching buddies and NFL
All right.
coaching buddies about hips.
Or you could just call up his fellow hookers and ask about hips.
That's right. By the way,
down on the corner.